Hi, my name is Nicholas Radina. I'm going to talk a bit today about how I use the Waves Multi-Rack native platform with an analog console. The Waves Multi-Rack is a really unique product. It allows you to run Waves plugins in a live setting. It's basically an application that hosts Waves plugins, and it gives you the ability to run multiple plugins in many different racks. If you want to think of it like a standard compressor or effects unit or an EQ, a send and return concept. You use just any interface you like. I use an AudioFire Echo unit, which gives me 12 ins, 12 outs of analog plus ADAT and SPDIF and word clock. But basically you're using the in and out of an interface, just like a send and return that comes back to your console. You create a rack, you assign the in and the out of that rack, just like a send and return, and insert it into your console. The way I utilize this is kind of out of necessity. One thing that live sound engineers don't have ever, it seems like, is time. We're always up against the clock. Once we get back to a point where we can actually do a proper sound check, we've already been troubleshooting everything, and sometimes we don't have a lot of time, and time is something that we never seem to have enough of. So I wanted to come up with a solution that allowed me to have a repeatable workflow regardless of the desk I was on that day, and I think I came up with something that works pretty well. So here's an example of how I utilize this. The desk of the day is this Midas Verona. Very basic, there's 8 auxes and there's 8 groups, and there's also a matrix section. The way I utilize multi-rack is I don't insert a rack on a strip or on a channel. A couple of reasons for that. Number one is latency. There really isn't that much latency with the plugins that I run. I run very low CPU plugins, but there still is a latency going on. Obviously that would be an issue if you're coming back, if you're doing monitors from front of house, and that strip is also going back to the stage, especially if the musician or artist is on an ear. So I don't put on a strip for that reason. I also don't because hard drives fail and computers fail, and that's probably the weakest link in this whole situation. So I always like to have an out. Always protect yourself in some way. So if it did fail, this desk is nice because there's a button to pop in and out your insert. If it did fail, I could pop it out. Good. But a lot of desks don't have that, and it would require me getting behind the console and actually physically removing the insert cable. So that's reason number 2, I don't put it on a strip. And the third one is just a choice. I tend to use group processing. I insert the multi-rack on these groups. So the multi-rack right now is set up for a session I did the other night with the Chris Robinson Brotherhood band. Basically, I had a drum group, a guitar group, a key group, maybe another key or guitar group, bass group, and a vocal group. This console has 8 subgroups. Another way to protect myself if there was a failure is I always have an out. A way to easily get me out of the multi-rack if I had to. And the way I do that is I assign all my channels to bus 7 and 8, or whatever 2 buses you might have left over within your grouping. So this gives me the ability to get in and out if I had to. And in all honesty, this has never happened to me, but you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you have to physically get behind the rack, unplug something, and it becomes a showstopper, which is not what we want to have happen. A couple things to pay attention to. Number one is if you're running subs on an aux type scenario. Obviously there's an issue here because you have your strip, and if you have your subs running off of an aux, that is taking a direct output basically from that strip. But your high packs basically are getting the multi-rack version, which has latency. So obviously your subs are going to hit earlier than your main speakers. So one workaround I have for that is I run subs actually on a matrix, if you have that ability on your console. Basically, I have a kick snare group, and I'll have a bass group. Off of that that subgroup, I can assign that to my matrix. So the matrix is getting post multi-rack. So your subs will hit at the same time the Hypax are hitting. And any processing you have downstream of the console as far as your time alignment with your subs and your Hypax all stays intact. So that's one thing to consider. Obviously, if you want to keep the multi-rack on a strip, this is not an issue because it's affecting the whole strip, including the aux sends, if you're doing subs in an aux. But I tend to keep that subs on a matrix. I actually run subs on a stereo matrix, which is a whole other story. So basically that's how I interface the Waves multi-rack platform with an analog desk. This really can be done with any desk. You don't have to obviously use my subgroup way of doing things, but it does keep the load on the computer low because you're not processing 24 channels of multi-rack, you're processing 4 to 8 channels of multi-rack. In all honesty, it works really well for me. One last thing, I guess, is to talk a bit about latency and combining an unprocessed signal with a processed signal. Obviously, there's a time difference there, so there's going to be a phase issue. There's going to be cancellations and additions going on, which kind of gives you that alien voice. So just remember that if you're assigning it to a group, you need to pop it out of the stereo bus and not combine that with anything else that isn't processed that way. It's very easy to hear right away if you've done that. So there's a couple Waves plugins that allow you to do a parallel compression kind of thing, which is really cool. Did this recently with the HComp. The HComp has a really cool parallel knob on it, which allows you to blend the unprocessed with the processed. So that works really well in this situation where you can't really combine your unprocessed with your processed. Okay, so that is basically how I interface the Waves multi-rack with an analog console. Just my workflow. Works for me. I hope it works for you. Please let me know if you have any questions. Leave the comments below. I'll try to answer the questions. I know this is kind of a quick introduction, but this is a question I get asked a lot about how I'm interfacing the Waves unit with the desk of the day. So I hope this sheds a bit of light on my process and how I do it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.